Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on generative AI, specifically covering the investment landscape. I will be doing this together with these two amazing panelists. So first up, here's Loïc Struyvelt. He's an investment manager at Curiosity, a company that specifically focuses on companies that build AI, that's responsible AI software. And you just got a promotion, so we quickly had to change your title. But Mathilde Lyet just became principal at the company that she works for, Dreamcraft. And that's a company that focuses on tech-driven companies. I think also a lot of AI at the moment, but maybe a little bit broader in the Nordics and also the rest of Europe. So to start us off, I would like to sort of be setting the stage a little bit, because I think when we think about generative AI, and specifically about last year, which was the big breakout year for this technology, everyone all of a sudden was like sharing recipes to ChatGPT and sharing their imagery that they made on Midjourney on their social feeds. And it sort of seemed like a magical time where this whole new technology that hadn't been there before all of a sudden became available to the masses. And I think as part of that, there was also a huge hype around it, right? So all of the newspapers were writing about it, people were talking about it, founders, and I'm sure were very, very excited, and investors, I assume, also. So maybe to start with what's happening right now, because I think in 2024, we see that dying down a little bit. At least it seems like the hype is cooling off. So some are even talking about a bubble, and I would like to start with Loïc. Do you think we are experiencing a bubble when we talk about Gen AI?
Yeah, good question. To be honest, I do think that indeed the industry is currently a bit inflated, but I wouldn't call it a bubble yet. I think what we see today, especially on the public markets, we see a lot of concentration in a couple of companies, NVIDIA, Google, Microsoft. We also do see the same happening in the private markets with mega rounds in OpenAI and the big foundation models. So you could say, hey, this kind of looks like the dot-com bubble, and maybe it is, but we don't know. But yeah, I do think that people had very high expectations of AI, and there were also kind of a lot of these phony features being released, like you mentioned, and these will probably indeed, cease to exist to some certain extent, because they don't really add value. People are being disappointed by the technology. So now you really see that we're kind of indeed, we know what it can and cannot do. So I think we're now more in that value creation period where indeed like people are experiencing all the benefits, but also have been disappointed. So it's like a bit two-faced, but I wouldn't say that we're in a bubble yet, at least. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and as investors, it is your role to sort of cut through the hype. And I came across an interview with another tech investor, and I think he was asked about how he feels about Gen AI and sort of the hype around it, and AI, I think, in general. And one of the things that he said was, so when a company actually brands itself as an AI company, that's a red flag for me. Like, I'm not going there. And if they don't do that, if they don't call themselves AI company, then it's a green flag. So maybe question for Mathilde, but is that solid investment advice? Do you believe that?
I wouldn't go as far. I think it's also maybe a bit of a black and white perspective, but kind of like a funny remark, I guess. But definitely, I think there's a kind of like a shift in terms of at least how the public see AI. I think ChatGPT was released in November 2022, and it was probably like one of the fastest growth in terms of a monthly active user to raise to get to 100 million in 2 months versus, I think it took like 4 years for Facebook and YouTube, for example. So I think in terms of being broadly known by the public and the audience, it is kind of like hard to deny that it has a big impact. Now, for the investor perspective, of course, many founders, of course, leverage that popularity and hype of AI to kind of like try to raise a bigger round with a less mature product. So that's something that we've seen. We've seen like 20, 30 million round, pre-revenue, pre-product. So a little bit, definitely overhype round. But we also see kind of like the opportunities with Gen AI technology. So startup that can use existing foundational models, so for example, of course, OpenAI model, but also Mistral or Llama 2 or Claude and so on, and that can leverage that to actually create value for enterprise in the B2B context, but also for consumer in the B2C context. So I wouldn't say that seeing AI on the deck is a red flag in itself, but I would be super careful into looking actually how it can create value to the customer, and also what's the background of the founder, and do they actually have worked with an AI product before? Because I think we see a lot of founders, for example, that have never built an AI product before, and all of a sudden claim that they are building an AI startup. So there I will be a little bit cautious.
Yeah, I understand. And Loïc then, so it's not all doom and gloom, and definitely there are companies in the space that do really interesting things. So what are some of the bigger trends that you see emerging in GenAI?
Yeah, I think we first saw that indeed with ChatGPT. I think there was a lot of focus on language models. So indeed, models, you could just ask it the question, the text was the output. And a lot of startups were building on top of that, creating nice companies. Some were also kind of just phony features. But now we do see actually that in the LLM space, people are really kind of now experimenting to give LLMs a bit of reasoning capabilities. I think it's also very important that an LLM like ChatGPT, it's actually not smart, right? It's just very good at predicting the next word, but it cannot reason. It doesn't have, let's say, consciousness or whatever. That's, I think, very important to stress. But people are experimenting with it. Like, if you kind of let two LLMs talk to each other, what actually can they solve a problem, right? One giving, maybe breaking up the problem, one actually in solving the smaller blocks. Which is kind of interesting. So we're moving more towards agentic approach, where we actually have, let's say, multiple large language models tackling one problem. And also what is actually very interesting is that we also do see now a shift from text actually to more kind of other areas, where we do see that there are foundation models created for protein design, that you can just ask, hey, I have this issue, I want to create a protein for this. Well, then it comes up with a protein structure that could be useful. We do see the same in material sciences and also in construction, which is, I think, very interesting.
Yeah, and Mathilde, any particular sectors that you feel will do really strongly when it comes to GenAI in the next?
Yeah, I think so. You have like the horizontal kind of like solutions, so trying to automate and to empower like sales, for example, or procurement, or different function within enterprise. And then you have the more like vertical approach. And there, I think, for example, healthcare is really, really interesting, both in terms of diagnostic, also in terms of drug discovery and so on. I think a GenAI solution really can have a massive impact there. And I would, really agree with Loïc on the kind of like multimodal approach. So not only leverage text, but also voice, image, videos, and so on. I think that's still relatively untapped, at least by early stage GenAI companies, and hopefully we'll see more exciting stuff there.
Yeah, and you already briefly touched upon procurement. Any very specific, exciting innovations that you see in the procurement space?
I won't pretend that I'm a procurement expert compared to this room, which I'm sure you know like 10 times more than I do. But I think perhaps a little bit more on the upstream procurement, so everything actually before the contract is signed. On like strategic sourcing, perhaps, or negotiation. I think there are a lot of very interesting stuff happening with AI. I think Pactum was on stage a few hours ago discussing how they leverage AI for negotiation. I think that's a super interesting, for example, value proposition.
Right. And so when we look at business models specifically, so I think one of the issues for, I guess, tech companies in general, but also very specifically GenAI, is profitability. And that also comes with the fact that it's really hard for them to actually control the computing power that they need to have, because it's built on these really huge models, and they need data centers. We already briefly talked about this before, but Loïc, maybe you can explain it better. How is this a risk for these companies?
Yeah, I think just taking a step back, I think with software, just general software without AI, it was very nice. You could just have just a simple subscription model, and it actually covered most of the compute costs because it was very predictable. But indeed, these days, what your customer actually does on the platform impacts really the compute cost, of course. If I, for example, use a tool and I do 10,000 requests, I will be a very expensive customer. And if you just charge me the same amount as my neighbor, then you're in trouble. So what we do see is that the only way to hedge against that is either kind of experiment with credits or usage-based pricing, where you just cap the amount of requests that a certain user can do for a specific price. Or you just say, hey, you can do 10,000 requests, but then you need to pay for it.
Yeah.
So these are like two things that we do see. So we do see often, like say, this variable component. Something very interesting that we do see, which is, I think, scaring me a bit, is actually success-based pricing, that you only pay for the output of the AI if it is successful. But then the question is, okay, when is something successful?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm not satisfied with the image, although it actually may kind of satisfy. It should be a good image anyway. But yeah, that also, like, if I do 10,000 requests and I'm actually not happy, then I'm again kind of putting the startup in real trouble. So
yeah. So, but what would then happen? Just so let's say that in 2 years these data centers say, hey, this is great, but now we're going to have a very hefty price tag for you to have to pay. Like, what will happen to these companies?
yeah, I think, and now especially these days, I think GCP and AWS are basically kind of distributing these free credits, and they're basically covering that compute cost, which is nice. And Google is offering 350,000 euros or dollars or whatever as compensation. But yeah, what happens if you actually run out of credits?
Yeah, it's definitely a risk, I think. We all see, as an investor for GenAI startup, like the rise of computing costs.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we are watching and keeping an eye on.
Yeah, this may be a good segue into the next question, but sort of because obviously investing is all about assessing risks and opportunities, and so to what extent would you consider this to be a risk if you know a company will run out of credits to use?
Definitely. I mean, need to be taking into account, like, you know, always costs versus value that they can create for their customers. And if the cost base increase, of course, the value that they create to the customers and hence the pricing also need to increase. Otherwise, the business model doesn't make sense anymore. So that's one area of risk that we are keeping an eye on. We don't have a perfect solution right now. I think there's probably still a lot of innovation that will happen to make computing costs more accessible, affordable, and also a bit more flexible. Because today you sometimes still need to buy a huge bank of credit when you actually just need some. So that's one area of risk. I think the second one is actually on bias. And the third one is probably on data privacy. And on bias, just one word, it's simply like with an LLM model, if you have a lot of data, you put a lot of data that's biased into the model, and that's particularly true, for example, if you use GenAI solution for maybe like recruitment purposes, just as an example. If you tell the model that a good candidate is a male in their 40s, I mean, it's not as easy as that, but if you just train it on data that show this, then of course the model will be biased. So I think this kind of like bias model and fairness is a topic that we're keeping an eye on, which I think will be even more important in the years to come. And the last one is on data privacy. For us as a B2B investor, one of the main concerns that typically the companies that are working with our startup in the portfolio is they always ask a question, will my data be secure? Will it be shared with other customers on the startup and so on? So we are particularly careful about that and always challenging the founders that we work on this specific topic. And we wouldn't work with a founder of a startup if they are not paying attention to that.
Yeah. And Loïc, are there any other factors that you would assess when looking at a GenAI company that Mathilde hasn't covered?
I think for us, it's also technological feasibility. I think we also really look at deep tech companies that are really pushing, let's say, the boundaries of AI today, and sometimes want to create something super radical and super interesting as well. But for us, it's also the question, like, how long will it take before you can get it to commercialization and kind of create value? Especially in more kind of the agentic approaches, where I explained like that you have a couple of LLMs communicating with each other. They're not stable yet, but we don't know when they will become stable. That will highly depend probably on OpenAI, Anthropic, and the big LLM providers to really create models that are powerful enough to facilitate that, but we don't know.
Yeah. Do you have an example of a company that has an amazing technical solution, but maybe not the best scalable, sustainable?
Well, I think one of our portfolio companies, QA Tech, is they're really pushing the boundaries of AI, and they built a autonomous QA engineer for web apps. So what they do is they read the front end of the page. They try to kind of interpret what can you do with this front end, and then they make a testing scheme for that front end. But having that interpretation capabilities and also kind of coming up with all these test schemes, LLMs are just not there yet. So you do see that they kind of have to limit their offering to basic test schemes like login or just kind of searching for stuff. And it's not adding that much value yet, but if the technology is there, then it will create huge value, because then you can basically kind of replace a QA engineer completely.
Yeah.
But we don't know when they actually will succeed. Yeah.
And perhaps another example, I remember a few months ago, was it already like maybe 6 months ago or something, I've seen some product demo from Divine. I never know how to pronounce, but it's a startup from the US claiming that they can replace developers. I'm sure you heard about them. They got quite a lot of funding. And they released some product demo which were like really impressive. I remember all of my friends who are like in the software development and AI engineers were really, really impressed. And then a couple of days or weeks after, actually found out that this product demo were basically staged. So just something that, we are still not there in terms of, for example, replacing coders or developers or engineers. The technology is actually not mature enough. It can basically replace maybe like an intern, but definitely not at this point. And it's really hard to predict how it will change, but
Yeah, you can imagine. And so another topic that I think also journalists really love to talk about, and people in general, is robots taking our jobs, which obviously is a huge one for AI and for automation and for generative AI. If we would have to apply that to procurement, maybe a question for Loïc to start with, to what extent will procurement jobs will be obsolete in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think, and just it will probably replace or automate most of the tasks that we as humans do, but that actually don't need any brain power. So if you're like in your job doing a specific task and you're actually not really thinking critically or kind of actively thinking how you should do it, then it can probably be replaced. So how we kind of look at it is, in most industries, yes, indeed, some of the parts of your job might be automated, but I think that also kind of gives you a beautiful opportunity to kind of, spend time on things that actually matter. I think in procurement, we do see just with data entry specialists or just with very basic purchasing agents, also people working in inventory, yes, at some point robots will kind of help you, or at least, maybe not really replace you, but just help you in your day-to-day job. So I think within procurement, it's very important that you kind of look at, okay, what can technology do today, and try to kind of step on that wave. Go on that wave and try to educate yourself and how you can leverage that technology for yourself. But because I think we also use it internally a lot, and I can spend more time with people instead of kind of copy-pasting data from one system to another. So for me, it's actually kind of giving me more joy in my job. Yeah.
And Mathilde, maybe a similar question for you, but to what extent do you factor in workplace transformation? Like, let's say you're investing in a company that you know will put a lot of people out of jobs in the next 10 years. To what extent do you use that in your decision-making process?
It's a super important topic. We always try to get a lot of recommendation and different viewpoint from people actually in the industry to kind of like understand, okay, but what would the adoption curve look like? Because if the solution is pretending that it will replace basically jobs, it's also like sometime that it would be like harder to actually convince leaders, for example, to adopt it from day one. So I think we are typically trying to really understand like the pain point of the industry, and then to find solutions that can address specifically those pain points, but not necessarily coming with a claim or tagline that they will replace X workers. That's typically not the easiest selling point, I would say, depending a little bit on also the industry dynamic.
Yeah, right. And as the market is maturing a little bit, I mean, obviously everything is still very new and fresh, but maybe start with Loïc. Do you think the market will consolidate around a few like dominant players, maybe US companies, sort of a winner-takes-all market, or do you think there still will be room also for niche use cases?
I think if you only look at the infrastructure, so I think model providers, yes, I think there will be some consolidation. Because what we already see today is that there is a lot of pricing pressure already. Actually, the performance differences between the different models are actually kind of becoming smaller and smaller. So if there is pricing pressure, there's not that much of a performance difference. Well, at some point it needs to consolidate to kind of become a sustainable company. You cannot stay in a pricing war. I think in the application layer, we do believe personally that I think verticalization is, I think, key, because that's the only way how you can basically differentiate. And also, like with startups in general, with strategy, you just start with solving just one specific problem and be very good at solving that specific problem. So you need to be verticalized to become successful. And I think we do see that actually with everything. I think when we invest in companies, for example, Altura, it's like a bid management software. It's like only solving the bid management workflow, leveraging that technology and be just the best of the best to do that. Yeah. So verticalization will, I think, is the only way you can win as a small startup.
And Mathilde, maybe similar question for you, because you both focus on European startups specifically, so already sort of in a disadvantage over the bigger ones in China and the US. But do you think European startups in this space can still compete with those companies, or should they just not even bother and do something?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are very optimistic. Otherwise, we wouldn't invest in European AI startup. But I think, given also the talent available in Europe, honestly, more, I would say, cost-efficient way of building company to date that we have seen, the velocity at which they can gain commercial traction, also speaking sometimes to more like European, European customers and so on. We are very optimistic. I think talent, good commercial traction is definitely something that we see with European startups, so super optimistic. There's a little bit of area, I would say, of a risk slash question mark around the legislation coming into place with the EU AI Act. But I think that can also be perhaps an opportunity actually for startup and company to implement AI in a more ethical way and to be maybe like a few steps ahead compared to a US company. So yeah, definitely very optimistic.
Great, and looking at the time, I'm just curious to hear sort of if you have to highlight one particular example of a company, probably the one that you're investing in right now already, and that's totally fine, but a company that you think does really well or is really unique in the GenAI space, maybe to start with Mathilde again.
Yeah, I can mention the two startups that we have invested in AI. So we have invested in one company that helps with the diagnostic of mental health, so leveraging a lot of data points, and they have this a bit like multimodal approach with a voice, text, and so on. So can't say the name of the company yet because we haven't announced it. But that's very, very exciting. And another one, which is perhaps a bit closer to the procurement industry people here, is Struyvelt AI. So that's a French-based company which help pre-sales team to automate how they respond to AFP and also increase the chance of success.
Great. So maybe these people will work with this company or the software in
on
the
the
next
other
couple of
side.
years. And Loïc, then for you, the final question: one company that you can hype up.
I think for me, from our portfolio, I think Nipol is actually a very interesting example. It was actually one of the first companies that we came across that actually really humanized AI. I think when we were looking at just transformer models, and ChatGPT was basically just a chat interface, but they were like the first ones to, kind of build ChatGPT inside a digital employee and also marketed it that way. And they give cardboard cutouts to all their clients. And it really sped up the adoption of non-technical people or people that they were even scared of AI. They didn't know what to do with it. And it was like, oh yeah, now Bas is working for a company. And he's like one of our co-workers, and we don't want to let go of Bas because he's great, because they all have their own personality, their own tone of voice, how they dress, how they look. So
do they also carry the cardboards around in the office, or do they have one particular?
Actually, they do. So it's like sometimes you see these pictures on LinkedIn, basically just the cardboard cutout next to the employees, and when they have, let's say, an office day off or just an offsite, the cardboard is also there because Bas is part of the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's actually really cool.
It's also a little bit dystopian, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening now, so I guess. It's quite a cool example also of how, like, actually, I guess the packaging or like the marketing or how you actually package the AI also is important. because then that could also like lower the barrier to adoption potentially and make it easier for people to feel comfortable working with an AI tool.
Okay, great. So to sum things up, I think AI will be stealing our jobs, and there will be a cardboard version of that person in the office to replace you with.
Yeah.
I think we're almost out of time, so thank you so much for joining and for being here, and thank you guys for this amazing input and session.
Thank you, Anouk.
Thank you.